Okay, let's start. So thanks for joining the next public demo. So today we just have one topic, but it's quite a large topic. So we wanted to introduce and go into a little bit of more detail about the new log plugin, the interface that we have. So for those familiar with the software management plugin system, so the log plugin system operates very, very similar to that. So we'll give a demo of it, go a little bit over the interface for that, and then we'll give a few additional examples, how to integrate that into your own kind of plugins. So we have an example with the tedge container plugin, but hopefully in the end we can kind of show how useful it is to get beyond log files. So currently, if you're not familiar with log management, we only can support getting logs if it's a log file. So you can deploy or configure whatever log files you want to retrieve, but we didn't then support getting it from journal-d, which is typically if you're running a service within systemd, then the logs are then written to journal-d. So with this log plugin system, it enables us to then fetch logs from journal-d, but also any other kind of log system that you have, Docker, Podman, or whatever. So I'll see if I can do a bit of commentary throughout, but Alvin will be doing the main demonstration and walking through the plugin system. Over to you, Alvin.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben. Let me just quickly share my screen. Please let me know once you can see it.
Currently not. Oh, it's coming now. Yep.
Okay. All right. So yeah. As Ruben mentioned, so I'll be demonstrating this new extensible log management functionality that we have added to tedge with the help of plugins. So as many of you are aware, with the existing log management functionality, we've long had this limitation where you could only retrieve file-based logs. So we had a configuration file like this where you need to specify the log files that you would like to retrieve from the device, and these are all file locations or log patterns for file locations, and you could only retrieve that. Now, most of the services running on your devices are most likely not emitting their logs to a physical file. So the primary example being our own services, the tedge agent or the tedge mapper, they emit their logs to the systemd journal, and many popular other services, even the Mosquitto by default emits to the systemd journal log. So, and you are not able to retrieve logs from any of these sources earlier until now. Okay, and that's what we have fixed with this new feature. So now we support plugins that can be used to retrieve logs from any log source. So you need to just write a plugin for the log source that you would like to support, install it on tedge device, and integrate it with the tedge agent, and then you'll be able to retrieve the logs. So let's start with a quick demo. So I've got my test device connected here, and you go to the log section and try to retrieve logs. Just now you will see a lot of entries with this : journal-d suffix. So these are the log entries or the log types supported by the journal-d plugin that I've installed on my device. Okay. So let's try and retrieve a log. So say, for example, the tedge agent log. And as you can see, so there is the logs are there. So let's just do some filtering as well. So now just the lines with the error in it. So now from the cloud, you are able to retrieve the logs from a journal-d service. Okay. So now what's happening under the hood? So I've got this plugin installed. So you need to have your plugins installed at this location with the share tedge log plugins. Okay. And you can see that there are two plugins already installed. The file plugin is the default one, the one that is providing that legacy functionality where you can fetch physical file-based logs, and this journal-d one is the new plugin. And so what does this journal D plugin have? Journal D help. So the plugin contract is fairly simple. The plugin needs to implement two different commands, okay? Subcommands, a list subcommand and a get subcommand. The list needs to print or output all the supported log types that this particular plugin supports. So in this particular case, if you see journal D list, it just prints out a few services that are installed on this device. And as you can see, it's those exact same types were visible here in the UI with that plugin name suffix, the Mosquitto, entity logger, etc., etc. So that's the contract. So the types listed by the plugin suffixed with the name of the plugin itself. And we are doing this suffixing for namespacing reasons because you could have multiple plugins where they might emit the same type. And you don't want them to conflict, so that's why the plugin suffix will make sure that okay they are properly namespaced. Now, so that's a list command, and the get command is also simple. Get SSH, so one of the types that it listed, and it will fetch you the logs, and it's printed onto the console. So that's contract. And additionally, it takes a few other arguments as well, the since and until timestamps in epoch timestamps for all the filtering values that you pass in the request from the cloud. So for example, so this from and time range are converted to since and until values for the plugin. But now, what about this filter by text, the text filtering and the last lines? So these are done by the agent itself. Okay, so the from and time are passed to the plugin itself, because in most cases the tool that lets you retrieve the logs is the one that can properly handle the timestamps as well, the time ranges as well. For example, the docker logs command or journal CTL command, which is what we use under the hood in the journal plugin. So these tools support this since and until commands, and that's why we are passing those values to the plugin so that the plugin can do a better job at that. But filtering by text and filtering by the last n lines, so this is done by the agent so that your plugin doesn't need to worry about those things. The plugins can continue to just print or display all the logs, and we will do the filtering at the agent level. So the plugins can be kept as simple as possible with minimal overhead of contract. Okay, so that's the plugin. That's how the plugins work, and that's how a request from the cloud is mapped to a corresponding plugin subcommand. So I will list and get. Okay, so now let's see how you can install a new plugin. Okay, so it's simple. So for the demonstration, I'm going to create a dmessage plugin, which lets you retrieve the kernel logs from the kernel ring buffer. And I am just going to copy the plugin that Ruben has written. Let's paste that and make it executable. And now, as soon as you have installed it, let's go back to our velocity, refresh. This is taking a bit longer. Yeah. And you will see that those additional entries added by the new plugin, the dmessage plugin, are also visible. So you don't need to restart the agent or anything. So when you install a new plugin, it is dynamically picked up by the agent, and the types supported by that particular plugin is published to the cloud. Okay, so let's try and retrieve that. Should work. Yeah. So there it is. So this is how the dynamic log type update happens when you install a new plugin. Now, let's try and install a new piece of software. For example, you saw that the journal D plugin, it was listing a few types. Now, what if you install a new service? So how will that get updated? So we will install a new cron service. Device. Supply that. Things are taking longer today for whatever reasons. Okay, yeah, finally. And now if you go back to logs, and try to retrieve the logs again, you will see that the newly installed service, the cron service, is already listed. Okay, and the way this is done by the agent is whenever you install a new piece of software using the agent via the agent, or when you update a new configuration via the agent already automatically refreshes all the existing plugins, because an installation of a new software is most likely to add a new log target, right? So because of that reason, we are doing this auto refresh on every installation or every configuration update, and that's how things are kept in sync all the time. So that's yeah, so that's about the functionality. Now just about writing a new plugin. So let's show you probably a simpler example. So this is how a plugin. So this is the Docker plugin for demonstration purposes. The Docker plugin will look like, and what you need to install. And this is a simple shell script. What you need to have is a subcommand, the mandatory subcommands list and get. And here the list is passed to the list log types. And what list log type does is something very simple. Just lists all the Docker containers and just filter them by their name. So that you will see all the Docker container names in the Velocity console. And fetching the log or retrieving the log is also very simple. So there is some passing of the since and until commands here. So this particular logic here. And after that, it's just simple Docker logs command for the given type, the target container name with the since and until values. So the plugins can be as simple as this. The actual plugins that we have are a bit more robust, so that the error handling is a bit more robust. So that's why I wanted to just show you a simple command first. But if you want to see the journal-D plugin that is shipped out of the box, so yeah, it is also doing something simple. For example, the list command just lists all the systemd units, and it filters out the systemd services itself, systemd login and all those entries, and strips the .service suffix as well, and then a bit of error handling. And the get logs command is simple. Again, the same until and since argument parts in here, and finally it's a simple general CTL command with the target unit, passed, log type, and the since and until values along with it. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I wanted to showcase. So any questions?
Yeah,
oh, and by the way, the file plugin is shipped on all. It's shipped by default. So this is one of the factory plugins that is available on all distributions. And the journal-D plugin is also shipped out of the box on systemd based distributions. So for example, the Debian, Ubuntu, RHEL, CentOS ones that has systemd integrated in them. So yeah, that's pretty much everything.
Yeah, so one significant kind of like change with this kind of like setup of having a plugin system is this kind of introduction of a dynamic type that the plugin itself can then register what types are available. We do recognize there might be some instances where if you're like the maintainer of the image, but you might want to do some filtering of what the log plugin is kind of like spitting out and going, actually, I don't want to expose that to the users. So we are exploring if there's an additional configuration settings that users can then do a post filter from those log plugins. So because that would enable basically, the journal-D to be generic. It doesn't need to know anything about filtering. It just knows, I know journal-D commands, so I can give you all the details. And then the tedge agent applies any kind of like user configurable stuff in there if you do want to kind of restrict what is shown then by those plugins. Worst case, you could always wrap it, create your own shell wrapper around it. But I think giving the option to people to limit the output on a kind of like a user level, I think definitely makes sense. But that's currently not implemented. So we're still exploring how that exactly is configured. But at least this powerful nature of giving dynamic types means that every time you add a new service, you don't need to then modify the tedge log plugin to add an explicit entry for that. So it's much easier to get like a updated list. So that also becomes quite interesting for container management. But we can take a few questions before I give a short demo on that.
And for those familiar with the software management plugin system, so yeah, this would be very similar. So it's the exact same design that we have taken. And the plan is to have a very similar plugin-based mechanism to extend the configuration management functionality as well. So that is coming next, where currently the config management lets you only read file-based configurations or update file-based configurations. So yeah, you will be able to do more than that with a similar design that's coming. Yeah.
And with this plugin system, it means you can kind of like do whatever you want. So you could even imagine if you wanted to do like remote file configuration by SSH and do remoting into the network, I mean, technically you could all do that. So that's the flexibility of having a kind of plugin system to kind of cater for those very unique situations that, you still want to kind of use the thin edge out of the box functionality, but then you might need to tweak, interface with some specific API or something like that to actually do the functionality that you want. Okay, if there's no questions, then I might take over.
Yeah.
So for the out-of-the-box functionality for the log plugin, so we will have maybe like 2 or 3 out-of-the-box functionality. So the journal D, the file, which is like the existing functionality, and then dmessage and stuff like that for getting kernel logs. But then a good kind of tool, so this functionality can also be then used by your own kind of plugins as well. So a good example of this is the tedge container plugin. So the role of the tedge container plugin is to manage containers and to container groups on a device. So it knows how to speak the container API. So it's the perfect candidate going, well, let's make it possible to retrieve logs for containers that are deployed. So the tedge container plugin, so we've created a PR which just adds this log functionality. So it adds 2 log types, which mirror exactly the software management types. So for the tedge container plugin, we have 2 types, which is container. So that's a single container deployment, or a container group, which is akin to a Docker Compose, which could be more than one kind of container in your kind of deployment. But it's meant to be like a stack or a group of containers within which then offer this single functionality. So extending that to this plugin was actually really easy. And because the plugins are then installed by the package, it means that everything's self-contained. So if you don't want to do container management, you uninstall the container plugin, and that will also remove the related container log plugins as well. So it's really a good kind of like extensibility built in. So I have a device here, also a test device, where I already have some containers installed. So I have a web server because it was just a simple deployment of a single container. And then I have something more complex like Node-RED, which I needed to control everything a little bit more. So that's why it's deployed as a Docker Compose file. So automatically, let's just move that. I get the, so if I just go containers, so I can actually see the different kind of deployments that I have. So the web server and then the Node-RED. So I can go Node-RED, let's have a look. Retrieval logs, easy as. So because I don't need to do any of like the filtering of text and last lines, the interface is so simple, it's quite rudimentary to kind of implement. So you really just need to do date filtering, which is 99% done anyway by the tool that you're calling, and then just coordinate the get and the list commands. So that makes all of these the containers then accessible. So not only from the container groups, but like single deployments, and that's easy. And again, like Alvin showed, like this dynamic nature. So if I would install let's say a new container type. Let's just go nats. Why? And because that's invoking a software installation, tedge in the background will be updating that list, and then instantly I see that I have nats in there. And then especially if you deploy it, maybe you want to kind of verify, did you do the correct port binding, or what port is it? And then, you know, collecting the log information is very useful to kind of debug, especially new services. So as like a plugin writer, that was very easy to kind of integrate with in most of the work. So those plugins don't actually have to be a shell script. So it could be any binary that or executable. So in this case, because it's a Go-based kind of plugin, I just wrote that in Go because I already had kind of some log retrieval logic. I just needed to adhere to the plugin interface, and then I was able to deliver that kind of functionality. So we're hoping people can kind of integrate their own kind of stuff. So some good candidates would be if you're using like Runit as an init system, using some kind of like S6 interface to get the logs, or any vice versa. So if there's any kind of like really generic log interfaces that, you know, make sense to have out of the box included with tedge, we're more than happy to add it in. But the main kind of criteria is if it's then used, let's say, by 90% of the installations, then we'll install it. Otherwise, you can just have it as a separate plugin and let users decide whether they want to install it or not.
I might have missed this, Ruben. I think great stuff. Are you including default support for dmessage?
Yes, that will be the plan, yeah.
Because that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So the only thing, so that's what I pushed this morning. The only question is, like, it's up to you. How do you want to model this? So because the interface is quite simple,
You're right,
you can model it however you want. So one thing I was going, well, dmessage has the concept of log facilities. So you can basically do categories of dmessage logs. So it's up to the plugin to decide, well, do I actually want to expose that to the user? So when you do a dmessage list, that will actually list kernel, user, mail, daemon, auth, etc. Or you can just have an all. So it's really up to the plugin to decide a little bit of how much configuration do you want to let or give to the user by defining your own, you know, what appears in that types list. So we're still deciding, you know, do we want to that level, or do we just keep it simple and have dmessage? Just give me everything, and then you can do client-side filtering.
That's interesting, you know, because out of curiosity, I just logged into my own Home Assistant, you know, a Home Assistant OS, and their dmessage, I think it's busy backspace, doesn't seem to support me this kind of filtering. So maybe this is something more, not all the Linux boxes support. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's always like differences in the dmessage and depending on the operating system as well. So yeah, but that can also be up to the plugin. So it can also detect, hey, do I support a log facility filter, and etc. So that's kind of part of, like, you know, making the log plugins a little bit more robust to add the own checks, you know, what filtering capabilities do I support? But because that's within the plugin itself, you can make that dynamic. So you can write just one thing. You don't need to go, you know, dmessage old school version or the new school version. You can just have one thing that automatically detects what kind of filtering is available, and then adjust the types list as appropriate. Yeah. And the great thing about this, so with this kind of moving the log plugin, kind of like externalizing it, it actually solves one of the long-standing issues that we've had. So typically in your configuration, so your log configuration, I think the default Mosquitto settings is to actually log the Mosquitto stuff to file. Yeah, I don't have an example, but to write to file. Previously, you couldn't use the tedge log plugin to retrieve that file because of the very restrictive permissions on that Mosquitto log file. So it was only accessible by the Mosquitto user. But with doing this, because doing the log plugin system, we're actually allowing the log plugins to elevate their permissions, because generally a lot of the common kind of interactions to get all of the log or access to the logs, you need that elevated rights. So we're basically enabling the tedge user to be elevated for those log plugins. So it doesn't enable all of the commands, but basically if you give a log plugin then that will run as sudo if you have sudo installed, to then give you access to things that previously you may have not had access to. For example, the Mosquitto logs. So it also solves a little bit, and you can also kind of restrict stuff if you don't agree with that. You can just manage that by normal sudo users. Sudo as rules. So it's quite easy to manage, quite easy to extend. So we're really hoping that a lot of people will enjoy this feature and enjoy the dynamic nature of it. So to make a little bit the log retrieval more useful. Okay, great. So this will be dropping in the upcoming 1.7 release. We don't have an exact date, but we're talking about weeks, not months. So that will be landing in that release. But you can try it already, so that's merged into main already. So you can install from the main branch and then try it out today. So I think we only have the journal D actually merged. So the D message isn't merged into main yet, but you can kind of have a play around with the interface and have a look, how we did it kind of in the journal D, and then extend it to your own. Great. Okay, so if there's no more questions, as always, feel free to kind of reach out on GitHub, Discord, or the community, tech community in Comlocity, and we'll see you next time. Bye.